Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with lobster mac and cheese. That's right, I've never been a big fan of the expression, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Because changing things that don't need changing is how chefs spend a lot of their time. So with that in mind, what we were attempting to do here is take our classic, totally not broken mac and cheese recipe and fix it up with lobster and turn it into something a little more fitting for a special occasion. Like, for example, Valentine's Day. So let's go ahead and get started. And first up, of course, you're going to need some lobster. And I'm going to use 2 tails. Those are about 5 ounces each. And by the way, for the record, to make real lobster mac and cheese, you really need to use a whole live lobster. And while I am a fan of keeping things real, I'm also a bigger fan of keeping things easy. So these tails are going to be a lot more user-friendly, yet still very delicious and effective. And what we'll do is we'll split those in half with a sharp knife. And then, just like if we're working with shrimp, there may be a vein. Well, actually, it's not really a vein, it's a digestive tract. But if you see anything like that, you want to pull that out. So our tails have been split. We pulled out any veins or other icky-looking stuff. And at this point, we can head over to the stove, where we're going to partially cook these in a very hot pan. So I have a skillet set on high heat with a little bit of vegetable oil. And we're going to sear those for about 2 minutes per side. And we're not trying to cook these through. We just want to get a little bit of color on that lobster meat. That's going to sweeten it up, intensify the flavor a little bit. So we'll give them a couple minutes. We'll flip them over. And we'll give that shell side a few minutes. And like I just said, we don't want these to cook all the way. Okay, we actually want that lobster to finish cooking in the mac and cheese for extra flavor and moisture. All right, if I have to give you a percentage, we want these cooked about 40 or 50% of the way through. So it's just going to be a couple minutes per side, at which point we're going to turn off the heat. Please turn off your heat. And we will remove those partially cooked lobster tails to a plate to rest. And then into the pan, we're going to toss a couple tablespoons of butter, which of course is going to melt in that hot pan. And as soon as it does, we'll turn our heat back to medium. And we'll stir in some flour to make a roux. So stir in that flour, and we'll just cook that on medium for a minute or two to take the raw edge off. You know the drill. This is like our 300th roux on the channel. And of course, as we're doing that roux's kind of deglazing the bottom of the pan. It's releasing all those lovely caramelized lobster bits. And then once our roux cooked, we're going to pour in about 1.5 cups of cold milk. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but cold milk, hot roux, no lumps. So we'll stir that in until it's incorporated. And we'll continue cooking on medium heat until we see it start to simmer. And like all roux-based sauces, that's not really going to thicken up until that happens. And as soon as that starts to thicken, and you see it starting to simmer, we will turn our heat down to low and add some more stuff. First of which would be a nice shake of cayenne. And then we're also going to add a little bit of paprika, something nice, preferably from Spain. Sorry, Hungary. And we'll stir that in. And in addition to a little bit of flavor, it's going to give this dish a little more of a lobstery color. Okay? And then I think we do want a little touch of nutmeg, which, as you know, I like to freshly grate. It's just better. And what we'll do is we'll stir that in, and we'll just let that sit there on the lowest heat setting, stirring occasionally for about 3 or 4 minutes. All right, so the base of our cheese sauce is pretty much done. And while we're waiting, our lobster tail should be cool by now and ready to pull apart. And all we need to do here is stick your thumb in between the meat and the shell and just separate that meat, but we're not going to discard the shells. Oh no, we got plans for those. What we'll do is we'll add those to the water in which we're going to cook our pasta, which, believe it or not, is going to add a little bit of flavor. So we'll add those to our pot of water, along with, of course, a generous amount of salt. And of course, we're going to bring that water to a boil because it's almost time to cook the macaroni. So our lobster meat's set, our pasta water's set, and at this point, we can go ahead and finish our cheese sauce, which, as you remember, has just been sitting here on low heat. And what we'll do is we'll add a nice pinch of salt. Of course, that's going to be to taste, and a whole bunch of shredded cheese. Personally, I'm going to use 4 parts cheddar to 1 part Gruyere, and we'll go ahead and we'll mix that in. And as soon as that cheese looks like it's just about melted, which for me was right about here, you can still see a few shreds here and there, but that's close enough. At this point, we want to turn off the heat. Okay, you never want a cheese sauce to simmer, so we're going to turn off the heat. And then one last touch here that I forgot to put in earlier, a few drops of Worcestershire sauce. 3 to be exact, because 2's not enough and 4 is too much. So exactly 3 drops of Worcestershire. And we'll stir that in, and basically this is done. All we need, of course, is some cooked macaroni. So we'll toss that into our salted, boiling lobster shell water and cook it according to directions. And I know some people like to undercook it, but I don't. I like to cook it to just about the same point of doneness as how I'd eat it. So a hair underdone's okay, but you don't want it too underdone, otherwise it's going to suck up all your liquids. And then once we think our macaroni is almost done, we should pull out those lobster shells. Because I'm going to use a strainer to transfer that pasta into the pan, I don't want those shells in the way. So we'll go ahead and pull those out, but don't throw those away. We're going to use those to garnish later. And then as soon as our macaroni's cooked, we will go ahead and transfer that into our cheese sauce. And it's totally fine if a little bit of that water comes with it. That's a good thing. So we will transfer that in and we will mix it around. And at this point, you could be thinking, that's a lot of sauce. Do we really need that much? Yes, you do. If it's not really saucy at this point, your final product's going to be way, way too dry. And then for one last touch, I decided to toss in a few fresh thyme leaves, just a little bit. You do not want to overpower this with a lot of herb, so just a little hint. And of course, it goes without saying you're going to need to taste this for salt. So make sure you're tasting and adjusting. And once that's all stirred together, we are ready for final assembly. So at this point, we're going to divide our mixture between 2 buttered gratin dishes. As you can now see, this makes 2 large portions. So we will divide that between our buttered dishes, at which point we will top it with our chopped lobster. So take that reserved lobster meat and just cut it into some chunks, not too small. You definitely want to know you're biting into lobster. And what we'll do is we'll scatter that over the top to make sure we have the same amount in each. And by same amount, I mean your Valentine gets a little more than you. That is just good crustacean-related karma. And once we've scattered over our lobster meat, I want you to take a fork and kind of poke it down in. So we kind of want to poke it down in to insulate it a little bit. And once that's set, we're going to go ahead and top this with buttered Parmesan breadcrumbs. And for that, all we need is a little bit of melted butter, some panko breadcrumbs, or any breadcrumbs for that matter. And we'll give that a mix. And then all we need to do is mix in a little bit of grated Parmesan. So a very simple mixture, but incredibly effective. And once that's mixed, we will generously apply that over the top. Not a super thick layer, but we do want total coverage. And then just like the lobster, I like to take a fork and give that a little poking down. All right, we want that crispy topping to become one with the mac and cheese. So I do like to give it a little forking like this before it goes in the oven. And at this point, we can transfer that into the center of a 400-degree oven for about 15 or 20 minutes, or until it looks like this. It should be beautifully browned. And at that point, you're pretty much ready to serve. Although it's really not a bad idea to let this sit for about 5 minutes. It really is way too hot to eat right now. And the last thing we need at a romantic Valentine's dinner is somebody burning their tongue. So I would let it rest for a few minutes before plating up. And while we're waiting, remember those lobster shells I told you to save? Let's go ahead and use those to garnish our dish. Check it out. That looks pretty good. And at this point, I'm ready to serve, so I placed my gratin dish on another plate. I also did a little bit of fresh chive because I got to take a few pictures. And while I have no way of knowing your Valentine, I'm pretty sure they're going to think this looks amazing, smells amazing, and most importantly, tastes amazing, which we will check right now. So I'm going to dig into this thing. And it really was fantastic. I mean, lobster aside, this is just a really, really good mac and cheese recipe. But when you add in those chunks of sweet lobster meat, this goes up to a whole other level. In fact, this is so good, you better make sure you have a few things around for breakfast too, okay? So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.